And cleaning up after your pet's the worst. Wish there was a quicker way than my broom. Wait a minute. There is a quicker way, fourth graders. Duh. There was a machine invented to help us pick things up quicker. That has a lot to do with the story we're reading today. Let's figure it out. In case you don't already know, my name is Mrs. Lawson. Thank you so much for coming back to start a new story with me today. We are gonna show these slides and get started. We are starting the story, John Henry. Can't wait for you guys to figure out who is John Henry. The learning intention today is we are learning to use descriptive detail to explain our understanding of the text. Now, first off, you might be asking, what is descriptive detail? So that is the first thing that will make you successful today. Define what is descriptive detail. Then you're going to refer back to details in the text and use details in the text to answer questions. So again, that fourth grade skill of going back and looking for details to support your answers. Now, our foundational skill today is still that suffix "ly." So let's practice the word actual. Can you add "ly" to the end of that? Yeah, the word is actually. And let's see if we can use that word in a sentence. The weatherman said there was a chance of rain, but actually it was sunny. So it's kind of the same as really. So in reality, this is what happened. Oh my goodness, fourth graders, you are going to read one of Mrs. Lawson's favorite tall tales. It is the story of Johnny Appleseed. So you're going to pay close attention to those words that end in a "ly." So affectionately, carefully, happily, really, respectfully. And let's start at the beginning of the story together because I love this story. The story of Johnny Appleseed is one of America's great legends. Oops, I meant to say a legend, but it's one of my favorites. But Johnny Appleseed wasn't a legend at all. He really lived and really planted apple seeds. His real name was John Chapman. In 1792, at the age of 18, Chapman set off on his travels. So you're going to have to keep reading without me to figure out all about Johnny Appleseed. And make sure you record yourself so you can see how you're doing and listen to yourself read. So today we have quite a few vocabulary words to go through. This first one, do you know what it is? Enduring. So if you're enduring, let's see from the story how they use it. Whether John Henry was real or mythical, he was a strong, enduring character to many. And I think of the Energizer Bunny. It says it's going to last a long time. So what does it mean if you're enduring? Yeah, I kind of just gave you a hint. It is continuing or long-lasting. What about collapsed? I know you guys have probably seen this word before and you've collapsed from being exhausted. Well, in the story, working in the terrible heat, many steel drivers collapsed by noon. So by 12 o'clock in the afternoon, they were exhausted. And yeah, you figured it out. Collapse means you fall over or given way. So like this dog and this cat, they are collapsed on the ground. Some other words, just so you know, is regulations. This is a rule or a law telling us how to do something safely. And I can make some connections with this vocabulary even today. So see if you can write some of these words in a sentence. You can send them to your teacher to show them, hey, I can use this vocabulary in everyday life. And next we have superior, higher in rank, status, or quality. So Superman was really strong, so he had superior strength. Lethal, when I see this sign, it means it's dangerous, right? So if it's lethal, it's causing or capable of causing death. It could kill you. Got to be careful of lethal stuff. All right, let's go ahead and start reading this note about the story. So sometimes we skip these notes, but let's pay close attention and figure out, why is this note part of the story, and what are the most important ideas about the origin of this legend that we find out from this page? Because I had never heard of this legend before we read this together. So let's get started. After the Civil War, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad Company laid hundreds of miles of railroad tracks through West Virginia. These new railroad routes opened up timber and coal lands and created new towns. When the tracks reached the Alleghenies, the railroad company hired more than 1,000 laborers to build tunnels through the mountains. The tunnels were created by blasting through the mountain shale. This work was done by steel drivers, men who drilled steel spikes into the solid rock. Once the holes were drilled, they were packed with dynamite. Since the early West Virginia tunnels had no safety regulations, they had no rules to keep them safe. These tunnel workers were exposed to an early death from the dynamite explosions, falling rock, and lethal, so the deadly, dust created by the blasts. Starting in the 1870s, a black steel driver named John Henry became the subject of many of the work songs sung by railroad tunnel gangs. Like most work songs, the John Henry songs consisted of a few short lines repeated several times, with pauses in between for the stroke of a pick or hammer. Historians disagree about whether John Henry was based on a real man or not. Some believe that he could be traced to a John Hardy, a true life subject of popular ballads, who was also a superior, so really good steel driver. Others believe that a man named John Henry actually worked on the Big Bend tunnels in the Alleghenies. Whether John Henry was real or mythical, he was a strong, enduring character to many Black laborers. Later, when songs about him were recorded and played on the radio, he became known to the general public as well. Guys, I just learned so much. So this is why we have the notes at the beginning of the story, to help those of us that have never heard this story and we don't know the background. Like, I just learned that a lot of steel drivers, those people who were using the picks to work, they worked in really unsafe environments. There were many different things that they didn't have regulations to keep them safe. They were exposed to death from dynamite explosions, falling rocks, and lethal dust. So inhaling that dust, making them sick. Wow. So that is some crazy stuff. And to answer the question about the origin, where it came from, we don't know if he's real or not. We don't know who the story is based off or where it came from. It just started when they were singing about him. So that gives us some good insight before we get started. All right, it looks like this is John Henry. I already noticed some stuff about him. Oh my goodness, look at this little guy here. All right, so the night John Henry was born, the sky was as black as coal. Thunder roared through the heavens, and the earth trembled. "This boy is special," the preacher said, as folks gathered in the cabin by the river to see the new baby. In the dim lantern light, John Henry was the most powerful-looking baby folks had ever seen. His arms were as thick as stovepipes. He had great broad shoulders and strong muscles, but as folks stared at him, he opened his eyes and smiled a smile that lit up the southern sky. When John Henry raised his arms, folks gasped and brought their hands to their faces, for they saw that the mighty baby had been born with a hammer in his hand. Then they all began to laugh and felt happier than they had in a long, long time. John Henry grew up fast in a world that didn't let children stay children for long. Before he was 6, he was carrying stones for the railroad gangs that were building tracks through the lands of West Virginia. So if we look at this question over here, it says, why do you think the author compares John Henry's arms to be thick as stovepipes? This simile. Why do they use it? Well, it would help if we knew what a stovepipe looked like, right? So here's a few examples. Now that we see them, we can see that those are pretty thick, they're pretty big. So it's giving us a visual or a picture of what his arms looked like and how big they really were. So that's why the author uses similes and descriptive language so that we can see a picture in our heads as the reader. By the time he was 10, he was hammering steel from dawn till dark. No train whistle in America sang as loud as John Henry's mighty hammer. It rang like silver and shone like gold. It flashed up through the air, making a wide arc more than 19 feet, then crashed down, driving a steel spike 6 inches into solid rock. By the time he was a young man, John Henry was the best steel driver in the whole country. He could hammer for hours without missing a beat, so fast that his hammer moved like lightning. He had to keep a pail of water nearby to cool it down, and he wore out 2 handles a day. All the railroad bosses wanted John Henry to work for them. When the Chesapeake and Ohio started making a tunnel in the Allegheny Mountains, they asked him to lead their force of steel-driving men. Soon, John Henry was whistling and singing in the early summer light as he walked to work in the mountain tunnel. Beside him was his wife, Lucy, with eyes as bright as stars and hair as wavy as the sea. Lucy was a steel driver herself. At noontime, she drove the spikes while John Henry sat with their little boy Johnny in the sunny mountain grass and ate his lunch of ham hocks and biscuits with molasses. Lifting Johnny high into the air, John Henry shouted, "Someday you're going to be a steel driver man like your daddy." July of that summer was the hottest month on record in West Virginia. Working in the terrible heat, many of the steel drivers collapsed by noon. But John Henry tried to protect their jobs by picking up their hammers and doing their work too. One week he did his own work and the work of 4 others as well. He hammered day and night, barely stopping for meals. Wow, that's a lot of work. Man, that's all we get to read today, guys. John Henry seems like a really hard worker. So today we're really focusing on descriptive details. So authors use descriptive details to make their characters and the setting as vivid as possible, which means they help the reader see it, hear it, maybe smell it, feel it, and taste it. The things that are being described. So they're using all of your senses. So let's look back. Which details from the text show that John Henry is dedicated to his work? Now, this is on the wrong slide, so we're not going to look at that. But let's look back into the story. What details show that he's dedicated to his work? So, right here, let's look. You guys see anything? Let's look here. Soon John Henry was whistling and singing in the early summer light as he walked to work in the mountain tunnel. Beside him, his wife, so they're walking to work. July of that summer was the hottest month on record in West Virginia. Working in the terrible heat, many of them, oh, here's a good detail that shows he's dedicated. He didn't just do his work. How many other men did he do work for? He did his own work and the work of 4 other men as well. He hammered day and night, barely stopping for meals. He worked so hard. Up here too, he was the best steel driver in the whole country. He could hammer for hours without missing a beat. So he's like picking up and going for hours, guys. I know Ms. Lawson would get tired. Maybe you guys could do that, but whew, he is dedicated and he's a hard worker. He also said here, he worked so hard that he had to cool down his hammer. He had to put it in water to cool it down because it was beating so much and so fast. He also used his handle so much that it wore down. Guys, he is like the hardest worker I've ever heard of. All right, so let's reread. This is where you got to go back. Page 68, and focus on the description of John Henry's hammer. So we're really looking for what can we see, hear, smell, can we taste anything? Think of those senses. By the time he was 10, he was hammering steel from dawn till dark. Can't think of anything yet. No train whistle in America sang as loud as John Henry's mighty hammer. It rang like silver and shone like gold. Now, I feel like this is a good descriptive detail. So that's the first detail I'm going to put in my chart. And I never warned you guys to make one of these with me. So go ahead and pause the video here and make this with me right now. And I know it's kind of giving away some of the details we're going to look through together, but that's okay. Hopefully you paused the video and made that chart with me. So let's talk about these descriptive details. So we just looked at rang like silver and shone like gold. If something rings like silver, what does that mean? Is that your sight or your ears? Yeah, it means you heard it, right? It made a loud sound. And what about it shone like gold? Yeah, you're seeing it. It's bright. So that's the first thing I noticed. It made a large sound and it's a flash of light. So that's what's happening when his hammer, right here, his mighty hammer, it rang like silver. So it's making this loud noise and it's shining bright. So when it's making contact, it's making a bright light. Let's pause the video here and add that detail because we're going to keep going back and working. Now, here it says it flashed up through the air. So it flashed up. So I think of flash, like he moves really quick, right? So that's what I put. You see the hammer fly through the air and it's going pretty quick. So that's something I can visualize. I can see it. Now the last thing, if you hear something crash down, it's really loud, right? So let's look back at what crashed down. It flashed up through the air, making a wide arc more than 19 feet, then crashed down, driving a steel spike 6 inches into solid rock. So on that last one, what do you think? If it crashed down, what do you hear? You hear the hammer drive through that spike into the rock. You're gonna hear a loud sound. Fourth graders, great job working with that descriptive detail. You are rocking it. Now for your reading response today. You are going to go back and look at when John Henry was born. How did the author describe John Henry when he was born? So you're going to go back to this page and you're going to look for that descriptive detail. You're going to go underline it and you're going to tell us, how was he described? You did an amazing job today, guys, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.